You've probably sat across from a doctor while they read off 2 or 3 numbers, blood pressure, cholesterol, maybe a blood sugar figure, and nodded along without really knowing what any of it meant or whether you should be worried. You're not alone in that. Most men leave those appointments with a vague sense of fine or not fine, and very little understanding of the actual numbers behind that verdict. I want to fix that today, not by turning you into a cardiologist, but by giving you the handful of numbers that genuinely matter for your heart after 60. What they mean, and the questions to ask so your next appointment is a real conversation instead of a nod and a handshake. I'm not your doctor, and every number I mention here is a general reference range, not a personal target, since the right number for you depends on your individual risk, your other conditions, and your doctor's judgment. With that said, let's go through them one at a time. Start with the one you've heard about most. Blood pressure is written as 2 numbers, the top one, called systolic, measuring the pressure when your heart beats, and the bottom one, diastolic, measuring the pressure between beats. Here's where things get genuinely more nuanced than a single magic number, and I want to be honest about that rather than pretend there's one figure everyone should hit. For years, doctors used a somewhat more relaxed target for older adults, reasoning that very tight control brought risks of its own, dizziness, falls, fainting, especially in men already dealing with other health conditions. More recently, large research has shifted that picture meaningfully, showing that tighter control, generally aiming below 130 for the top number, does provide real cardiovascular benefit even in older adults, in many cases outweighing those risks. But, and this matters, that benefit takes time to show up, often a year or more, while the risks of overly aggressive treatment, like a fall from dizziness, can happen immediately. So the honest, current thinking is that your target isn't a fixed number handed down from a chart. It's a genuine conversation between you and your doctor weighing your overall health, how many years you're likely working with, and whether you're frail or robust. A vigorous, healthy 65-year-old and a frail 85-year-old with several other conditions may reasonably land on quite different targets, and both can be entirely correct for the man in question. Next, cholesterol, and specifically the number that gets the most attention, LDL, sometimes called the bad cholesterol, since higher levels are linked to the fatty buildup in your arteries that eventually causes heart attacks and strokes. The honest picture here has become more individualized too, sorted by your overall risk category rather than one blanket number for everyone. Men considered at borderline or moderate risk are generally guided toward getting LDL under roughly 100. Men at high risk, meaning you've already had a heart attack, a stroke, or carry several risk factors at once, are typically guided toward a considerably lower number, under about 70. And men at very high risk, generally meaning you've already had a cardiovascular event and carry additional risk factors on top of that, may be guided toward getting it under about 55. Notice the pattern. The more your personal risk, the lower your target tends to be. This isn't your doctor being arbitrary. It reflects the benefit of lowering LDL scales with how much danger you're actually managing. Your own number and which category you fall into is something your doctor determines from your full picture, not something you can self-assess from a lab printout alone. We covered this in more depth in an earlier video, so I'll keep this brief. But it belongs on this list because your blood sugar and your heart are more connected than most men realize. A common marker called A1C gives a rough average of your blood sugar over the past few months, and for most adults without diabetes, a healthy range sits under about 5.7%. The zone between that and 6.5 is often called prediabetes, worth catching early precisely because it's still reversible territory. Above that generally indicates diabetes, which meaningfully raises cardiovascular risk on its own, entirely separate from cholesterol or blood pressure. We've also covered this one before, but it earns its place here specifically because of how directly it ties to heart risk. Waist circumference is often a more useful marker than body weight alone, since it's specifically flagging the kind of fat that behaves like an active organ, releasing substances that affect your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your blood sugar all at once. Rather than repeat the whole explanation, I'll just underline that this measurement genuinely belongs in the same conversation as the numbers above, not as a separate cosmetic concern. Here's one that rarely comes up but is worth knowing. Your resting heart rate, how many times your heart beats per minute while you're calm and still, is a simple, free window into your cardiovascular fitness. A typical healthy adult resting rate falls somewhere between 60 and 100 beats per minute, and generally, a lower resting rate within that range reflects a more efficient, better-conditioned heart, which is one more reason the strength and cardio routine we've built out across this channel keeps paying dividends in places you wouldn't expect. You can check your own with 2 fingers on your wrist and a clock, no appointment required. And tracking it over months as you build fitness is a genuinely satisfying way to watch real progress. I want to mention one more, briefly, because it's newer to general awareness and genuinely worth knowing about. There's a particle in your blood called lipoprotein(a), often written LP, followed by a lowercase a, that's largely determined by your genes rather than your lifestyle, and elevated levels are linked to higher cardiovascular risk independent of your regular cholesterol numbers. It isn't part of routine testing everywhere yet, but it's increasingly recommended to check it at least once in your life, since if it's high, it changes how aggressively your doctor may want to manage everything else on this list. If you've never had it checked and you have a family history of heart disease at a relatively young age, it's a very reasonable thing to ask about. Here's the honest theme running through everything we've covered. No single number on this list, taken alone, tells your doctor much. A blood pressure reading without knowing your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your age, and your other conditions is an incomplete picture. This is why modern cardiovascular care increasingly uses combined risk calculators that weigh several of these numbers together, along with your age, your history, and whether you smoke, to estimate your actual risk over the next decade, rather than judging any single figure in isolation. If your doctor mentions your 10-year risk percentage, that's exactly what they're referencing. And it's genuinely a more useful conversation than fixating on any one number alone. So here's what to actually ask, written down at your next visit. What are my numbers, specifically, blood pressure, LDL, and blood sugar, and what category do they put me in? Given my overall risk, what targets are we actually aiming for, and why are those specific numbers for me? Has anyone calculated my 10-year cardiovascular risk, and what was it? Should I have my LP checked a little given my family history? And the one I always come back to. What's the one number on this list most worth improving first? Those 5 questions turn a vague nod-along appointment into a real, informed conversation, and that shift alone is worth more than memorizing any specific figure. Since LDL came up, I'd be doing you a disservice not to address the medication that so often follows a high reading: statins. There's a lot of noise online about these drugs, much of it overstated in one direction or another, so let me give you the plain version. For men at meaningfully elevated risk, statins have one of the strongest evidence bases of any heart medication we have, genuinely reducing heart attacks and strokes in large, well-conducted trials. Side effects, most commonly muscle aches, are real for some men but considerably less common than internet chatter suggests, and there are usually alternatives or dose adjustments if one particular statin doesn't agree with you. This isn't me telling you to take one, that's between you and your doctor based on your actual risk category. But if one's recommended, it's worth knowing you're being offered one of medicine's more solidly proven tools, not an experimental gamble. And 2 factors worth naming because they don't show up as a number on a lab report, but change how seriously everything above should be taken. Smoking multiplies your cardiovascular risk dramatically, regardless of how good your other numbers look. And quitting at any age, even after decades of smoking, produces a measurable drop in risk within just a few years. And a family history of heart disease at a relatively young age, a father or brother affected before 55 or so, is itself a risk factor your doctor should know about, since it can shift how aggressively they want to manage everything else on this list. And it's the main reason that LP(a) test I mentioned becomes worth specifically asking for. A great many of you watching are probably realizing you've never actually had a real conversation about most of this. You've just been told, your numbers look fine, without knowing what fine meant or being handed the actual figures. That's genuinely common, and it isn't a reflection of your health being ignored. It's often just how quickly these appointments move. The good news is that every single number we've covered today responds to the same handful of things this channel keeps returning to: movement, strength, sleep, weight, and a sensible way of eating. So the effort you're already putting in is very likely already working in your favor here too. So here's what I want you to walk away with. Your heart health isn't one mysterious verdict handed down by a doctor. It's a small set of specific, knowable numbers: blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, your waist, your resting heart rate, and possibly that lesser-known LP(a), that together paint your real risk picture. Ask for the actual figures, ask what category they place you in, and ask what's worth improving first, and you'll walk out of your next appointment understanding your own heart in a way most men never get around to. None of these ranges are a diagnosis, and your own doctor is the one who turns them into a real plan for your specific situation. So bring the questions to that appointment, not just the worry. If this turns your next checkup from a nod-along into something you'll actually understand, giving it a like helps another man walk in better prepared too. Subscribing means the next honest breakdown finds you. Here's my question for the comments. Has a doctor ever actually told you your real LDL number or your 10-year risk percentage, rather than just saying things looked fine? I'd like to know how common that gap actually is. Since we mentioned it more than once today, the earlier video on why blood sugar quietly shapes so much of how you feel connects directly to several of the numbers we just covered. It's queued up on the end screen, and you'll find it in the description if you'd rather grab it there. Get your numbers, ask your questions, and I'll see you in the next one.